Greetings and welcome once again to legalizedfreedom.com. My name is Greg Moffat and it is my pleasure to welcome back John Michael Greer to discuss his book, The Ecotechnic Future, which is something of a sequel to his earlier work, The Long Descent. Now, while The Long Descent sets out why our oil-fueled industrial age is coming to an end, The Ecotechnic Future attempts to envision the world of the future and how, or even if, the human race can get there. John's a certified master conserver, organic gardener and scholar of ecological history. He's the current Grand Archdruid of the Ancient Order of Druids in America, and his widely cited blog, The Archdruid Report, that's thearchdruidreport.blogspot.com, deals with peak oil amongst many other issues. If you haven't already listened to my previous interview with John, you can find a link to it on the page for this interview. Or if you're listening to this perhaps as an MP3 or on a third-party website, simply go to legalizedfreedom.com, that's legalize-freedom.com, go to the tag cloud and click on John Michael Greer. Well, hello and welcome, John, and thank you very much for joining us today on legalizedfreedom.com.
Well, thank you very much for having me back.
Right, now, in our first interview a few months back, we discussed your book, The Long Descent. And today we're going to go over some of the main themes in the book you did after that, which is the Ecotechnic Future, and it's a sort of a sequel in a way, and it leads on from it. And I've recommended that people listen to the first interview we did together, just to sort of get themselves in the frame, as it were. But a basic synopsis of the situation as set out in The Long Descent is that the industrialized society that many parts of the world currently enjoys, the lifestyle associated with it, that's going away because it's not sustainable. We're completely dependent on oil. There's getting harder to find oil. In the future, that's only going to that situation is only going to get worse. So basically, industrial society is going away, and that's what The Long Descent is all about.
But going away in a gradual process, not the kind of overnight Hollywood catastrophe that most people think is the only possible alternative to continued process. You know, it's a matter of decline, a word that you literally never hear these days when people think about the future.
No, they don't. I mean, if anything, it's just sort of been almost wiped from the discussion dictionary. But in the Ecotechnic Future, you then attempt to say, okay, we're facing a long, grinding collapse of the erosion of the oil-based economy and society. So then what? What's going to happen? And you've discovered that, well, it's very difficult to tell because the future is so shrouded in sort of mist, as it were. But you've attempted to set out some scenarios, some things that you think, I think this is definitely going to happen here, some things that may happen. And it's quite a broad spectrum of things, really. It's not, you've admitted, from the outset, this is not a book that tells you what the future is going to be like. It's just trying to have a look and see what could be out there.
Well, one of the things that has to be remembered in dealing with any kind of future situation is that there are things you can know about the future. I mean, you can be pretty safe in assuming that, for example, the laws of nature are not going to be suddenly stood on their head. We are not going to get an infinite amount of oil out of a finite planet, and so on. We can go through the laws of thermodynamics and their impact on energy, and there's a range of other things. So there are certain things we can be fairly confident of. There are other things where it's more a matter of looking at, okay, what has happened in the past when other societies have been in the same predicament? Because we are not the first civilization to overshoot the limits of its resource base, not by a long shot. We are the largest. We have had the most extravagant resource base to overshoot. We've done things with it that other societies have not. Okay, granted, but that difference in scale doesn't necessarily not do difference in kind. And so we can look at what's happening. We can look at elements of our current experience that have followed the sort of standard pattern of societies in overshoot and say, okay, well, we've done this, like the Mayans, like the Romans, and so on down the road. What's the next step? Where does it generally go from here? And say, okay, that seems to be where we're headed to. And then of course, there's the speculative stuff. There's the, okay, what are the possibilities? What are the options? The things we can't know in advance because they depend on contingent factors. They depend on the choices made by individuals and groups that can't be anticipated in advance.
Now, for a lot of people still getting most of their information from the mainstream media and from mainstream politics and what have you, they still have a view of the future that's essentially optimistic, even with everything that's happening in the world today, because that's what they're still being fed. It's almost like, yes, there's problems, multiple problems across multiple fronts, but ultimately the people in control know what they're doing. The scientists, the politicians, look away here, nothing to see, we'll manage everything. But
it's all going to work out. We're going to go rising onward and upward to some glorious Star Trek future. Yeah.
Well, to put it in perspective and to get people thinking, if they are of that mindset, to get them maybe thinking differently, I'd just like to quote something from the introduction to the Ecotechnic Future, just a short paragraph, if you will. Only a few decades ago, a galaxy of scientific pundits and media figures regaled an eager public with images of what the year 2000 would be like. There would be bases on the moon and a big wheel-shaped space station in orbit, with scheduled flights arriving there from Cape Canaveral twice a day. Undersea cities would dot the continental shelves and harvest the supposedly limitless resources of the sea. Clothing would be disposable, and food would be synthesized on demand. Fusion reactors would turn out limitless cheap power, geodesic domes would sprout everywhere, and commuters would travel from lush suburbs to climate-controlled cities by helicopter instead of by car. Now, we can kind of chuckle at that and say, oh yes, they did kind of get it a bit wrong, didn't they, in the 60s and 70s, but as you point out, these sort of things were said with complete seriousness, even though some of the technology maybe didn't exist yet, some of it was just nascent. If the future wasn't going to be exactly like that, it was going to be of that order. And for those people still wondering about the projections that you have for industrial society that you've laid out, well, the present we are living in now was the future once, and it hasn't worked out the way it was supposed to be. So we're already in this cycle of decline.
Yeah, if you look at the future that, I turned 50 this year. When I was growing up, we were supposed to have this glorious high-tech future. It isn't here. Compared to that, we've already declined. We don't have the big wheel-shaped space stations. We don't have the regular flights to the moon. We don't have any of the things that every reasonable person, every significant pundit in 1950 and 1960 was sure we would have by this time. So you look at the gap between the expectation and the reality. Where are we? We're in an overcrowded, troubled, environmentally, seriously in a state of crisis planet. We have way too many people. We are running short on a whole range of resources. Many of the great triumphs that everybody assumed were in the bag have never happened. We can talk about fusion power sometime if you want a really embarrassing story about that. And there are all of these things. They haven't happened. We've actually plateaued and are on the way down at this point. And yet people insist, no, it'll all work out, onward and upward, new technological trinkets every year, and all the stuff that kind of fills the insides of people's heads. And that's partly because the media and the politicians are blathering it, but the media and the politicians get their ideas from somewhere too. This is our collective consciousness. This is the mindset we have, because progress is our religion. Progress is the thing that people put their trust in, the way medieval peasants put their trust in God and his saints. And the idea that progress may have ended in our lifetimes, that progress may be over for the foreseeable future, by which I'm speaking anything up to thousands of years, is as unimaginable to most people today as again, a medieval peasant looking up at the sky and suddenly realizing that God and his saints and angels aren't there anymore.
Well, quite, and although there's such sort of mindless optimism of the past, of the moon tourism and the deep sea bases is largely gone, there's still a belief that there's only one direction for us to go in, and it's this upward arc, and great store is placed on our ability on technology and on our ability to innovate, but we are seeing stagnation in technology. All right, I agree that some of the developments in computing and quantum computing are just staggering, but the bottom line is that they're still all completely dependent on oil, and that
Mm-hmm.
we can no longer rely on technology and innovation to keep getting us out of jams.
Exactly. Technology is not energy. And this is the thing. People say, well, we have technology. Okay, what powers the technology? Our technological structure, this whole Baroque complexity, can simply be described as a way to work off the energy differential between fossil fuels and deep space. Basically, we produce heat, we turn it into various kinds of energy, whether electricity or mechanical energy, what have you. We use it up, the heat eventually radiates off into space. That's all it is. It's a way of burning energy. It's a way of burning energy at fantastically extravagant levels, but that's all it is. Our ingenuity does not create the energy. Our ingenuity does not trump the laws of thermodynamics and the assumption that everybody makes, well, they'll find something. When you run out of oil, that's okay. We'll start using dilithium crystals or something like that. It's an act of blind faith. And it's a faith that has been contradicted over and over and over again in the last 15, 60 years as one, glorious new energy future, another has crashed to the ground.
Now, just a small side point, something's popped into my head I just wanted to address, and I'm kind of anticipating your reply on this one, but I was listening to American radio talk show host Alex Jones recently, and he had a guy on, and they were discussing a concept called abiotic oil.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and I thought so. But it's just something that other people may come across, and I thought we could address. But the basic concept seems to me is that the idea that oil is generated inside the Earth, that the Earth produces oil on an ongoing basis, and therefore it will never run out. This is a kind of blue sky, desperate thinking, is it?
It's what it is cargo cult thinking. Those are our listeners who don't know the fine details of that. After World War II, on a number of Pacific islands, people who had seen all of these airplanes suddenly landing and GIs pile out and all kinds of goods and stuff that could be traded in this, and for the years of the war, a lot of these islands had this immense economic boom because they had all these GIs here, they had all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, something changed that they were never really told about, and the airplanes flew away, and the ships went away, and the GIs went away, and there they were. And so what happened was that a lot of these people figured, okay, I think we need to build some airstrips. If we build airstrips, the planes will start coming again. Okay? Abiotic oil is exactly that kind of thinking. The science has been debunked over and over again. It's simply nonsense. Okay? Any competent geologist can look at oil and tell you what age of life forms gave rise to it, the chemical composition, the strata. Below a certain depth, you don't get oil at all. What you get is natural gas because it's too hot. The oil breaks down. All of this is very straightforward stuff. But the fantasy that there has to be more, that there has to be limitless supplies. Anytime you hear the word limitless, what that means is that somebody has stopped thinking. I think it was Garrett Hardin. Words like infinite, limitless, eternal, all of those actually mean I don't want to think about it. Because, the Earth is a finite planet. I'm quite convinced that most of our listeners have seen pictures of the Earth from orbit, okay? I am quite convinced that none of them have seen a pipeline from Neptune refilling the oil that we're taking out of the planet. And so this whole fantasy that a finite planet must have infinite energy is pure denial. It's pure evasion of the simple reality of limits.